One of the most commonly mentioned figures on this channel has to be Charles Yerkes. Yerkes was the American entrepreneur behind much of what now makes up the London Underground. But how and why? Why would a successful businessman relocate from Chicago to London? Well, I thought it might be nice to take a look at the extremely shady American business dealings of Mr. Charles Tyson Yerkes. Yerkes was born on June the 25th, 1837, near Philadelphia. His father, Charles Tyson Yerkes Sr., was a successful banker. In fact, he was the president of a bank, and young Charlie would follow him into the world of business. He was 17 when he took his first job as a clerk. Evidently, business suited him well because just 5 years later he founded his own brokerage firm. 3 years after that he opened his own banking house, aged only 25. Now, it's true to say that his father's reputation and contacts gave him a leg up, but Charles Jr. was certainly no slouch. He could make money where no one else could. The achievement that made his name was selling a city bond issue at par, or to put it in layman's terms, at its face value. No one else had managed to sell without a discount. It was around this time that he got into the world of public transport. America was a nation on the up in the 19th century, and Philadelphia was a case in point. In fact, in 1854 it had become the largest city in area after annexing 128 square miles of surrounding territory, and the city fathers even hoped that they might overtake New York. All these new suburbs needed transport, and the city's streetcar network expanded to meet that demand. Philadelphia already had horse omnibuses, but the streetcars were faster, smoother, and had greater range. What was more, in those days before decent roads, rails could go where buses couldn't. In 1876, the city had the largest streetcar network in the world, with a ridership of 100 million passengers a year. Yerkes, never one to miss an opportunity, quickly invested in this flourishing network. But while Yerkes may have been respected, his methods weren't respectable. He was something of a gambler, making risky and even dangerous investments, confident that he'd win the day in the end. And, to be fair, he usually did. But in 1871, disaster. Specifically, the Great Chicago Fire, which burnt much of the commercial district of that city to the ground. The result was a financial panic, and Yerkes was caught with his trousers down, financially speaking. Yerkes had just invested heavily in the Pennsylvania Railroad, using money borrowed from the city of Philadelphia. This was really not something he should have been doing, nor should the politicians responsible have allowed him to gamble with public money. Still, if his plan had worked, it likely wouldn't have mattered, but the panic exposed his shifty dealings, when he found himself unable to pay the city back. He was forced to declare bankruptcy, and worse, was convicted of technical embezzlement. What's quite telling is that his defense lawyer argued against the conviction on the grounds that everyone was doing this sort of thing. The judge was not impressed, and Yerkes was sentenced to 33 months' imprisonment. So, in response, Yerkes threatened to name names. Given that the names in question were linked to President Ulysses S. Grant, a pardon was granted, and Yerkes served only 7 months. But he was ruined. His reputation was in the gutter, and he was ostracized from polite society. What do you do when you've become notorious for corruption and criminality? Well, in Yerkes' case, he moved to Chicago. Chicago was the perfect place for a man with skill, ambition, and a very limited conscience. Like Philadelphia, Chicago was a growing city, and in fact would overtake Philadelphia as the largest city in 1889. This was fueled by hard work, ingenuity, and of course a healthy serving of corruption. The city was controlled by what were known as Boodle aldermen, Boodle being contemporary slang for a bribe. Yerkes started small, returning to brokerage until he could see what was what. But he could see that the city's growth offered many opportunities in the world of public transport. The way it worked was this. First, you boodle your alderman. He awards you a streetcar franchise, which gives you a monopoly on a line or lines. Then you find smaller streetcar companies that aren't doing so well and buy them up. People get excited and invest in those companies, so you earn more money. Then you make improvements to the lines. You extend them, or electrify them, or convert them to cable haulage. But here's the clever part. You also own the companies that make those improvements. Those companies charge a ridiculous price, but that's okay because the person making the demands and the person paying up are the same guy. Then, while the going's good, you sell up. Or as Yerkes himself succinctly put it, buy up old junk, fix it up a little, and then offload it on some other fellow. Another of his famous quotes was, "It's the strap hanger that pays the dividend." But that wasn't strictly true. The lines Yerkes invested in did indeed pay out an impressive dividend, but it came from capital. So whoever bought his old junk off him quickly discovered that there wasn't anything like as much money as there appeared to be. Anyway, Yerkes began investing in streetcars, and soon the city had a truly impressive network under the banner of the Union Traction Company. Of course, he made enemies along the way, but that's business. What he wasn't anticipating was the arrival of elevated railroads in 1892. The South Side Elevated Railroad, to be exact. The elevated railroads, or Ls as they were known if you were cool, were all round better than the infrequent, unreliable streetcars. So Yerkes had to invest in building some Ls of his own if he wanted to stay on top. Which was all very well, but Ls were far more expensive to build than streetcar lines, and therefore more of a financial risk. But Yerkes had an idea. His franchises were up for renewal in 1903, and what he hoped was that he could persuade, wink wink, the aldermen to give him a 100-year renewal. In 1895, the Humphrey Bills were passed, which would give him that renewal. But Governor Altgeld threw them out. Successful Yerkes may have been, but he was far from popular. In 1898, the alderman, tried again with the Allen Bills that would give him a 50-year monopoly. They got through the state legislature and moved on to the city council. Yerkes took out a little insurance in the form of $1 million worth of Boodle. The council prepared to vote when a noose was lowered from the gallery. Word came through that there was an angry mob outside City Hall armed with guns. Faced with the prospect of a bullet through the head, the alderman decided that under certain circumstances lead can weigh more than gold. The Allen Bills were rejected. The only thing that was shot was Yerkes' reputation, and he sold his stock to Peter Widener and William Elkins. Given that Elkins and Widener had mentored Yerkes in the wild world of public transport, they should have seen what was coming, but apparently not. In 1903, the Union Traction Company went bankrupt. But by then, Yerkes was long gone. He'd moved to New York, but by now his reputation stank so much that he couldn't repeat his Chicago trick. And so he turned his eye towards London. Kinder biographers have suggested that his motivation was to prove that he could succeed in a city that wasn't as built on corruption. Personally, though, I think he wanted to start anew in a city where they wouldn't see him coming. Well, I hope you enjoyed this corrupt tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. This is a more detailed remake of an older video, or rather a partial remake. That one talked about the whole of Yerkes' career, not just the bit in America. Let me know if you'd like me to tackle his exploits in Britain. Anyway, I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the Boodle to my alderman. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.